leading a self-help group for women called Sura. So it is a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome, Nisha Miss. So how are you? I think you're on mute.
Yes, yeah. Doing very well, thank you.
Good. It's really good to have you here. And let me start with my first question for today. So when you decided to do the fellowship 10 years ago, right? So the social sector in India was in its nascent stages, and Teach for India had just been founded in 2009. And you were part of the second ever cohort, and you did your fellowship in Mumbai. So could you tell us more about why you chose this path, and what were some of your thoughts and feelings that led you down this way?
Sure. I joined the fellowship right after my master's in journalism. I was studying at Asian College of Journalism. And I got into my master's in journalism knowing that I wanted to be writing, and I always knew I wanted to be in the social sector, but I thought the path was to be writing in the newspaper. And a lot of fieldwork at that time made it very clear that even if I was to be writing something, that's going to be sort of read by the same people over and over again. And if we want to really make some big change, then a lot more people need to start reading. And just the idea of the power of a written word stayed with me. And the idea of taking that to more children was very exciting. And around that time, in fact, my friend saw a small advertisement about Teach for India on the newspaper, and the Teach for India hadn't built their website also at that time. But just the idea of getting to teach children directly in low-income areas was very exciting. I applied and I got through the fellowship. I think there was a lot of conviction and curiosity about this. My grandmother is a teacher. She did her B.Ed. She's worked as a teacher in a government school. So the idea of teaching has been very close to home. So I think there was a lot of conviction also about this is the right thing to do. Although family was not sure at that point. They were still saying, you should take up a job. You've gotten placed. Do something that's far more mainstream. Also think I went in with a lot of curiosity. I had a lot of questions about how does this work? What is this 2-year fellowship? And so I think initial thoughts was a lot of conviction and curiosity.
Thank you for sharing that.
And also just hello everybody to whoever I'm meeting here. And it's both exciting and it's a little bit strange to sort of meet so many of you all. I would just love for this to be fairly interactive. So please feel free to use the chat box to keep posting any thoughts and questions. And I hope we can make this sort of an interactive session and not like a one-way. I am sharing something. So please feel free to use your chat box liberally and keep adding your comments and thoughts. That will be really helpful.
So we've opened up the Q&A window. So anybody has any questions, so you can definitely post it here, and I will take it up with Nisha. So just building off of the first question, you've been with TFI after you did the fellowship. You were with TFI for 5 years, and you've held leadership roles while working with up to 100+ fellows and also program managers. So could you tell us a bit more about your fellowship experience in Mumbai as a fellow, and then transitioning to a manager role and a leadership role in Chennai, and what are some of the similarities that you found in both the urban settings, and what are some differences that you saw?
Sure. I think I was right from when I was in grade 9. I've worked with different kinds of communities in Chennai, and it was sort of familiar. The working in low-income communities was something familiar for me, but nothing prepared me for what it meant to be working in Govandi. It's a resettled colony. It's a slum in Mumbai. I think the children, adults alike, I think have it very harsh there in terms of just the difficult living conditions to what is expected out of children. So it's not education as such. I think in Tamil Nadu, a really big difference I see between Chennai and say a city like Bombay is in Tamil Nadu, I think the value of education is parents are so much more aware of that. Children largely come into school knowing they have to be in school, whereas when in my 2 years, although I taught children as little as grade 3 and 4, I had to work a lot to invest them in the idea of education itself, in the idea of why school is important. And conversations with even a 4th grade child was about saying, yes, beta, today you can earn 50 rupees, but if you're not going to finish school, you're not going to be earning significantly higher as you grow. And I think that's a very different thing that I see. Whereas in Chennai, I think parents also are very, very sort of understanding of the needs, which is very, very different, I think, from what I saw in Bombay. I think the second sort of really big difference is infrastructure. Working in Tamil Nadu, I think all my 5 years that I worked with different schools in Chennai, I think it was very exciting to think about what does going from good to great look like. Like whether it's in terms of infrastructure, materials available, we're not struggling with things like teacher absence, not as much as say Maharashtra. And then to say, despite this, why are children not learning as well as they can? And think about learning materials. I think Tamil Nadu is doing well seemingly on so many aspects, but not necessarily on learning outcomes. So I think the challenge was so different. I think working in Bombay, it was a lot more about how do we keep kids in school? How do we invest parents to be doing what they have to be doing for their kids? Whereas in Tamil Nadu, it was a lot more about all the materials are available and how do we take it forward. So these are sort of really big differences. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, in a city like Bombay and in a city like Chennai, there are such stark differences in two urban communities.
Yeah.
And when you worked in Mumbai, when you started off the fellowship, there must have been certain personal challenges, right? Going in, you must have had certain expectations. You must have gone in with certain skill sets. So, what are some of the challenges that you faced? You mentioned investing the parents. So, yeah, how did you go about it, and what were some of your approaches to that?
Sure. I think it's very difficult to view it as a challenge in isolation. I think 8 years after my fellowship, I think every single challenge was the reason why I grew. So I almost feel like every challenge was an opportunity. But some of the really big opportunities that my fellowship presented to me was one was a very technical thing of I didn't speak Hindi. So I'm a typical student who studied in Madras, who learned third language as Hindi, and so my reading ability was decent, but I absolutely could not speak Hindi at all. And that, but I also think that's the reason why my children picked up English so much faster, because that was the only way we could communicate.
Yeah.
And I think for me, working through the challenge of saying I'm going to learn a language so that I can communicate to you, built really deep relationship with my children. I think over a period of time, whether it was my kids or the other teachers in school or the parents I worked with, really respected the fact that I was trying to learn something and that meant something for them. And just one really big thing I took away from that is how it's very important to respect where your people are coming from. And although after that, all my working years has been in Chennai, I think that experience really taught me to remember to understand the culture of the people we are working with. Remember to, even though it's Tamil, I think just even now with the teachers I work with, I stop to ask, oh, how do you cook this in your region? Or I make this a little bit differently. And taking that little bit of extra effort to understand their culture and them as people, I think that was sort of a really big thing that challenge taught me. I think the other sort of a really big challenge was understanding my privilege. I think coming from, I read a lot. I love reading. And for me, just to even understand that children in grade 3 do not like books. They do not like reading, or the fact that they have to be invested to be learning their alphabets. I think that learning gap and making sense of learning to empathize with that learning gap. I think it definitely took me some time that I was just out of college. I wanted to change the entire world and sort of didn't have the patience for children who were not willing to learn. And very quickly, I think within 3-4 months, I quickly realized that like I have to be really empathetic towards every single child, and I have to really invest every child to be learning. And that was sort of a really big challenge to say, how do you empathize with the child, but also have the expectation that I want you to be able to do as much as say what I was able to do growing up in a privileged background in a city when I was in 3rd grade. I think that was sort of a really big challenge. I'm also seeing a question of how should be a student-teacher relationship. I think that's a very difficult question to answer, but something I've learned in my fellowship and something I've seen with all the fellows I've worked with is when the teacher is able to be really vulnerable and themselves and honest, and whatever happens, I think that's sort of the best ways. And hence, I don't know if they can be a should. This is how it should be. But I think if a teacher is able to bring themselves to that classroom and be very honest to themselves, that marks a great relationship. And I think lastly, coming back to challenges, I think a theme that's always stayed with me as a challenge is constantly being able to understand the context of our people, but also keep showing them what is possible. I think there was definitely a challenge in my fellowship of saying, I want to really understand that today you are not able to read or access this, let's say even something like computers or technology or Google, or some of these things were so new to my kids. But I still want to keep showing you that there is something else that's possible without actually making you feel bad about where you are. And the tension between, I want to really understand your context, but I also want to keep exposing you to something new and where the world is going. I think that tension has also been a challenge. And in hindsight, I think every single challenge has been a fantastic opportunity for me to be learning and growing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really resonate with the fact that the fellowship builds a lot of empathy, and it transforms a person, totally. So you spoke a lot about, working with children and your experience working with children. We'd like to understand a little bit more about your experience working with teachers. You've worked with teachers for many, many years now after your fellowship. Yeah. So how has been your experience working with fellows and then now, teachers in a rural setting? And how has your understanding of the problem evolved through the period of 7 or 8 years?
Sure. I remember distinctly feeling very nervous when I finished my fellowship. I felt like I had such a good rapport with the children I worked with. I felt very successful as a teacher, and I was very nervous about working with adults. I came in feeling like adults are far more complex. It's very difficult to drive change in an adult. It's far more easier to drive change with children. I'm somebody who values happiness a lot at workplace, and I felt like my classroom was such a happy space. And actually, 10 years into my work life, I think those 2 years were my happiest workspaces. And we worked hard together, but it was very happy. So I started my time of working with adults with a lot of sort of apprehensions, whereas I went into my fellowship feeling very curious and excited. But I think if I have to summarize everything about it in one big thing, I don't think working with adults is very different from working with children. I've come to realize that whether it's a Teach for India fellow who I've worked with, who comes in with an aspiration wanting to be a great teacher, or if it's some of our teachers who actually are very honest to say, I don't want to be a teacher. I didn't want to be a teacher, but this is all my father said I have to study, and hence I've studied this and now I'm a teacher. But irrespective of where that person is, if they are invested in their children, if they really care for their children, I've seen that adults go any length to make that sort of a change happen. And so I think in my work with fellows and adults, I think a lot of my work has been about, can I understand this person better? Can I understand their motivations? Can I really support them with the technical skills that they need to achieve their motivations? Because I often think technical skills, without technical skills, trying to drive something is very difficult. But once there is that kind of inclination and motivation, then I've seen like any kind of teacher do really well. I remember in my first few months at Teach for India, this phrase of every child can and will achieve. And I think my 8 years of working with adults, I think I can comfortably now say that every adult can and will achieve, and it's up to us to make that happen. So that's broadly. And I still think I'm understanding adult education. I'm still understanding adult trainings. So many trainings down the line, I still think we need to learn a lot more about what happens between an adult learning something and applying it in their classroom. There is a black box. We don't understand that enough. So I think it's a good challenge to have, and it's something we're still learning a lot at Kanavu as well. Yeah.
Thank you. It was very reassuring because, a significant portion of Bhumi Fellowship is also working with the teachers in the school.
Yeah. And also, if I may add, I think while we may think working with children is easy and happy, I think working with adults, I know, is bringing long-term sustainable change. Because for every teacher who we are able to impact and influence, then you know that for the next 10 years that they're teaching, 14 to 10 years or 400 children is being impacted. So I do think there is a lot to gain by working to invest adults.
Thank you so much. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense because, and it's also reassuring, right? It's intimidating for, youngsters to think I will have to work with, people 5 years older than me, 10 years older than me, and will they listen to me or not?
Yeah.
but this is very reassuring to say that
Yeah.
if you're able to understand, empathize with them, they will
Yeah.
eventually be invested. So,
Yeah.
which brings me to my next question, right? So, you have been working with adults for the past 7-8 years, right? So, how has your fellowship experience contributed to the skills that you need to work with adults, or the skills that you need to work in education setting or a school setting?
Sure. I think if I had to pinpoint to one, the biggest skill that I got out of my fellowship and that has helped me, I would say, is just planning. And by planning, I think it's not so much that, oh, now I made a plan and everything will happen exactly according to the plan. But I think my ability to plan and then be able to adjust to whatever is happening. And then anybody who's taught even for a lesson will understand that just because you've planned something, it's not going to happen exactly the same way. But we still have to make sure that those children learn that fraction or division or whatever that is. Very similarly, I think whether it's like working with adults, working on a year plan for our teachers or whatever it is, I think just a biggest skill that I got out of fellowship is how do you make a really solid plan, but also be able to keep adjusting it to meet the current needs. I would say that has been a really big skill. I think another skill is how do you work with a diverse set of stakeholders. That's been a skill that I would say I'm continuing to learn. I think in the fellowship, I went in with a notion that, oh, the children and the teachers I work with are the only stakeholders. But very quickly, I realized that I'll have to invest so many people to have children in school, right? From the school watchman uncle who I've had to request to say, keep the doors open till 5 o'clock because I want to take extra class, to the HM, to other teachers, to the Hindi teacher of my kids so that she would teach in a certain way. So I think there's a lot of people to invest. And I think just our ability to work with a diverse set of stakeholders and planning, I would say, were two biggest skills that I got out of my fellowship. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So right now you're leading two initiatives in rural Cuddalore, and you work with school, you work with self-help group for women. So what changed and what contributed to your transition from an urban setting to a rural setting? And
Sure. I think there's always been an inclination to work in rural India, and I've always asked myself, am I serious about my work with education? Then if I am, then rural India is where 70% of India's children are getting educated. And if you have to really understand what it means to work with the landscape, then it's important to work in rural India. And it has been helpful that my husband, who's also another co-founder of Kanavar, shares a love for India. So Gautam and I felt like at some point we should be moving to rural India. And for both of us, the interest for Gautam, it's been a lot about exploring India for what it is. And I think for me, it's been about just if you're able to understand what it means to provide quality education in a rural setup, we can do it anywhere. Towards the end of our 7 years with Teach for India, it felt like things were getting very comfortable. We knew how things worked, and it felt like we could have continued doing this for a few more years without. There were challenges, but it was not as challenging as our first few years at Teach for India. And we happened to meet Mr. Loganathan, who runs these Asifa schools in Cuddalore. And we got talking, and an opportunity opened up to come and work here in these rural communities. And honestly, I think we didn't think too much. If we had thought too much and worked out the logistics of it, possibly as an arrangement, it wouldn't have worked out. We said, let's move in and let's see what happens. And I think the fellowship as such gave, after the fellowship, I think this was possibly the second sort of a courageous decision. It was an unthinking decision, courageous decision that we made, and very happy that we made that shift from urban to rural.
Thank you for sharing that. So I've been to Kanavar, and I see the level of investment the teachers bring in, the level of effort that goes into making a good teacher. So how has your experience been for the past 3 years working with these 5 schools, and what does it actually take to build excellent schools, to transform a school?
Sure. I think such a great question, and the answer is we are exploring that. And I can share some initial thoughts, of course. I think a couple of words to capture the past 3 years it's been very enriching and very challenging. It has been very enriching to learn and understand about what we think we know. When we moved in here, we thought we knew a little bit about rural India and a little bit about how things work here. But coming here very quickly, we realize it's one thing to know about it, and it's another thing to actually live here. And we stay in a school campus, and Lokesh has visited us as well. And it's been very different an experience to understand the culture and understand where our teachers are coming from and design programs based on that. Things we take for granted, like, oh, we can do a training from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. in the evening. Those things don't happen in rural India. So I think the biggest sort of a thing about this experience has been, how do we contextualize something, let's say some aspects of Teach for India Fellowship, how do we pick that up, but still contextualize it to something like rural India and work here? I think what does it take to build a great school? I think a very simple answer is if at every level there are people displaying great leadership, then that sounds like a very simple answer to say, starting from the school leader to the teachers to children to or non-teaching staff. If everybody is demonstrating a certain kind of leadership and there are common goals that people are working towards, then that makes a great school. But that said, in reality, there are so many different cultural, sociological, economic, so many different factors that come into play. And I think that's what also makes our work very challenging, to say, how do we build leadership across all our stakeholders to ensure that just because a child is born here in Cuddalore, they are not deprived of an opportunity that a child who's born in Chennai or the US is getting today. How do we sort of reduce that kind of inequity has been a pursuit for us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, which also brings me to my next question, right? So when we talk about, understanding the context, contextualizing what we know to the stakeholders that we work with, what has been some of the differences that you've observed, working with corporation schools in Chennai and now working with these rural schools? And what is the depth of the problem that we are facing today?
Sure. I think when I think about the difference, I think a reality that really strikes me is some of our teachers struggle to read what some of our corporation school children can read very easily. So that puts things in perspectives, to say that a typical teacher here, all our teachers come from very remote villages. Most of it is not connected by even a bus. So they have to walk a bit to get to a nearest bus, and they rely on the van to come to school. So even a very interested student does not get an opportunity to learn anything beyond their textbook. So they have not had access to a library. They don't have access to English newspapers. And then they're in an English medium school where they're expected to read and understand their textbook and deliver a certain quality for their children. And when we moved in, when we did a few reading tests, we quickly realized that a good number of children in a Chennai Corporation school will be able to read some of these words in the textbook, which our teachers are not able to read. So that's the kind of gap that exists. And while we thought a lot about, we are moving in here so that we can work on quality education for children, much of our work has been about, let's work on quality education for our teachers. If you took something like the teacher eligibility test, the TET exam, we found that across Tamil Nadu, teachers have performed so poorly. And that is an indication of how, if teacher quality is so poor, then what they're delivering to their children is also very poor. But it's not the teacher's fault that the teacher's quality is poor, right? It's a cyclical problem of when the quality of education is poor, then the kind of teachers we're generating is not really helping solve the problem. So how do we break that cycle is by ensuring that we are able to provide our teachers with both the content and the pedagogical support. So I think in terms of depth of the problem, I think it's reinforced for us that it's a cyclical problem, and just teaching somebody content and pedagogy itself is not enough. And how do we build leadership in them to say, okay, currently you have this knowledge gap, and how are you going to, despite your circumstance, how are you going to learn and prepare something for your students? I think that's where we see like the idea of leadership is important. And to give you an example, in the school that we're working in, the microscope was not working for a long time, and we were not able to find somebody to help us. And then one day it was working, and we found out why. The science teacher in a public transport has carried the microscope home, gotten a lab technician in her village to come to her house and fix this for her, and now the kids have access to a microscope.
Right.
And that's where we think it's not enough that the teacher knows the knowledge about a microscope. She also has to have the leadership to make that connection, to say, oh, I can get a lab technician to fix it. So what a school system could not do, a teacher displaying a certain kind of leadership is able to do. And I think that's our hope for, when you think about the depth of the problem, I think it's not enough for a teacher to know what to teach, how to teach. It's also very important for a teacher to problem solve as to how can I get the best to my students.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think systems thinking comes really alive here in a problem where we are dealing with so many interlinked issues. How solving one can lead to, solving another problem. Here, like you said, working with teachers a lot more, investing them, educating them will also naturally lead to how they are teaching in the classroom and eventually the learning outcomes of the children. So it was really good to hear from you the different things that you're dealing with, and how working with the mindsets of the teachers also contributes to the solution. So which brings me to my next question, right? So there are a lot of people working in urban setting. So what need do you see for people to do a fellowship, such as a Bhumi fellowship, to understand the context and then come back to the rural setting? And how do you see that experience contributing to the solution?
I think the need is huge. Even at Carnival, I think we're working to bridge that gap, and we constantly keep opening up volunteering opportunities as well. Lokesh also come in, and over the past 3 years, we've had about 350 different volunteers coming in and working with us in different capacities. And I see that with adults who have some working experience with education in the urban setup, what they're able to bring in is a lot of exposure and knowledge of how a certain thing can happen. So for whether it is science education, whether it is every school in rural India doesn't have a library, and I want to set up a library. So whatever the nature, whatever the scope of the problem is, I think the experience of working in urban gives you a certain vision of what is possible. And the context of I'm willing to spend time here and work here in the rural, I think gives you a lot more understanding of the context. And when the both come together, I think very powerful solutions can emerge. And if we are able to see our time in the urban setup as some sort of a understanding process, as some sort of a time to experiment and understand what works, then coming in with that very rich sort of a knowledge and skill and that mindset to play the long game here. I think it's very important for anybody aspiring to do anything in the rural to come in saying it's a long game. I'm not going to be able to come here and in 1 year make a big change and leave. That's not how it works. And hence, if we able to bring whatever experiences we have of the urban and willing to contextualize it in the rural, I think that's a great space for anyone to move from the urban space to the rural.
Yeah. And for you personally, how crucial was your fellowship in you being here?
Sure. I think, as cliche as it sounds, the fellowship was very path-changing and life-changing for me. I still remember clearly the conversation with my parents saying, okay, do this for 2 years and then you'll come back and take up a job, right? Because at that time, a fellowship was not seen as a job. I think even now, a lot of parents may not see fellowship as a job. And but I think at the end of my fellowship, there was no looking back to say, will I be doing something else? Because I think the fellowship grounded me in what the need is. The fellowship also gave me confidence that I can contribute in some way. And that's a great place to be in, where you're also seeing that there is a need and you're also seeing that you have a path, you have a way in. There are some things that I'm good at and I'm going to contribute. The fellowship also really was humbling to say that the problem is so big that of quality education or of dignity in livelihood. Like both of these are such huge problems that it needs all hands on deck. So I think the fellowship was a very, very crucial experience in that sense, in that regard.
Yeah. So like you said, right, there are many reservations with respect to people stepping into the social sector. They might have done an engineering or they might have done something else. So, people do have some reservations. So, what do you see? What opportunities do you see in the social sector for people at this point in time? You stepped into the social sector 10 years back, and how has the scene evolved? And what kind of opportunities do you see? And do you think those reservations are justified, or?
Yeah, it is a great question, and I think there are possibly two parts to it. One was post-COVID and pre-COVID times. I think the post-corona COVID times is going to be quite hard to predict what's going to happen. But I do think it's showtime for entrepreneurs. I think if you have a great idea and you're able to figure out a way to work with it in a resource crunch time, because the needs that the country is currently having is so huge. And as someone working in the social sector, if you have that drive to want to create change and you want to be that entrepreneur, I think it's such a great time because people are ready. I think there's far more readiness now to say, yes, there is a problem. There is a problem in how we are educating up. There's a problem in how we are treating our migrant laborers. There's a problem with the health crisis. There's not enough materials. I think more people are talking about some of these things, which even 3 months back, only some of us were thinking about. So it's a great time for anybody who's thinking about social change. I think the only aspect where some of these fears are justified is that there is not enough money being invested in an equitable manner in the social sector. I think there's a lot of difference between some organizations having access to a lot of funding, a good number of organizations not having access to a lot of fundings. Not always are great ideas funded. Not all grassroots ideas are able to access fundings through incubators. So there's a lot of inequity within the social sector space as well, which in some ways means that the fears are justified. But I do think my experience is that once you understand the need and once you see that you are able to contribute, that becomes a real sort of a confidence factor for you to not go back and keep questioning if this is the right thing to do or not. And I also think just spending stakeholder time will also give you the answers for if you are implementing a very poor solution, your stakeholders will be able to tell you that it's not working. And hence, I think just that way, social sector is very responsive. You can't be doing something wrong for a very long time. So as long as we have that awareness and we're able to work with our people, I think there is a lot of potential and scope. In the past 10 years, I think there's been so many more fellowships that are rising. And that's a great opportunity because a fellowship is a lot of learning, but it's not theoretical. So you're still in the ground, you're still learning, experimenting, you're making mistakes, but it's some sort of a safety net, because there is an organization that is supporting you with the training. And so it's almost like college, but you're also like interning, you're also working. So a fellowship, I think, is a great space, which I hope all fellowships are able to continue post-COVID as well. I also think there is a lot of incubators that have risen. I remember in 2012, when I graduated, we weren't really thinking about, can we start out something on our own? But today I know at least 5 or 6 different alumni who've graduated from different fellowships who I'm mentoring to help them see if with their idea can they start out something new. And that's because of a confidence that's coming from incubators. So if you have a great idea, then there are people who are willing to listen to you and put in money into an idea. I think tech is also changing the landscape quite a bit. Which was again very different 10 years back. And again, possibly in a post-COVID time, we're seeing that tech in education is going to be a way forward, is going to be a game changer. People are thinking about questions like how will we bring tech-enabled solutions to disadvantaged communities. Broadly, I think these are going to emerge as some of the needs in the social sector. I think something I've heard from our founder and that always stays with me is that there's always opportunity in the social sector. We are never going to be at a place where there is no opportunity to make this world a better place. I think the real challenge can be, if you want to put a price to it, it becomes very difficult. If you're thinking that I want to be earning so much by being in the social sector, I think that's the only place where there's conflict. But even with that, I think things are improving. People are today thinking about how social sector also needs like a good pay scale and things like that. So I think it's an evolving world and it's ready for more people to join us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And that was also, again, reassuring, right? In the past 10 years, the sector has grown so much. There's opportunity for everyone, to open up their enterprises.
Yeah.
We have 3 more minutes. I have a personal question, after which we will take one question from the participants.
Sure.
So my question is, what have been some of your highs in your journey with Kanavu in the past 3 years, right? So,
Yeah. I think quite a lot of highs, I would say. I think every time we're in a classroom and we see like learning happening, every time we're able to see a teacher being able to say like, I wasn't able to do this முன்னாடி என்னால இதை பண்ண முடியல, இப்போ பண்ண முடியுது. I wasn't able to do this before, I'm able to do this now. I think some of our really big highs were when we were able to get computers from Zoho and we did a digital training. And we had a teacher say that I've only seen computers on TV, or I've seen it in papers, and I've never in my lifetime imagined I will touch a computer. And today, the fact that I can open and read an email means a lot to me. I think moments like that justify a lot of challenges that we go through. So I think those are where learning has happened, has been a really big high for us at Kanavu. A lot of spaces we've created has also been a high. Like when we've had 10, 12 volunteers come together, stay here on campus and support our teacher learning. We've had volunteers from Bhumi as well who've joined us for those Kanavu camps. I think those Kanavu camps is a high. It's a lot of hope to say that there are people willing to invest their time and energy for 65 teachers in rural India is a very hopeful thing.
thank you so much. So we have a question from one of the participants. So they're asking, what was the biggest hardship you faced and what motivated you to come out?
I'd like to just talk about at Kanavu. I think our biggest hardship was funding, which is we have an idea. We have a great idea. We have some proof, but it was really difficult to talk about it in the right way, to find the right words, applying for the right kind of incubators, making those donor pitches, presentations, and just financially stabilizing Kanavu. It continues to be a challenge, but I do think we've been able to work with that challenge reasonably well. That has been a really sort of a huge challenge, and I think the challenge reinforced the learning that we have to invest everybody in our work. We have to, when we have a donor saying, I would like to support only urban projects, what is our ability to push them to say that we understand your concern, but there is a big need in rural India. Can you really help us? And then to understand things like, okay, they're worried about a geographical barrier. So can we commit to sending them monthly updates so that they know that their money is used well? So it's been a lot of learning and saying, I also want to be empathizing with donors and not see them as people with money who are not giving it to us. So I think that's been a really big challenge. I definitely think we've grown stronger in creating a good pool of champions for Kanavu, and continues to be a challenge, but I think that's a challenge that, from what I understand, that's going to continue to be a challenge in the social sector anyway, to continue to get funding for your idea. Yeah, it's been a big challenge. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have another question. Basically what they're asking is, Raghuram is asking is, how do you basically invest the parents in the education of the children, right? How do you approach that? How do we remove that as a hurdle for the children?
Yeah. I think my take on this is every parent is very invested in their child having a better life than them. In all the years I've worked, I've never seen a parent who's wished bad for their children. And then it becomes a teacher's job to say, can we give them the knowledge and the skills to be able to support their children effectively? Maybe a parent thinks that beating is the way that can happen. And then we're working with that parent on that. Or we are helping, like something we've done right from my fellowship to something I encourage teachers to do now is just even helping parents mimic some of the systems we do in the classroom. So at home also, can they have a tracker where children finish homework and go put a tick there against the date? And can we give parents sort of some of the knowledge and skills that we have to support their children? But I think going in with the belief that parents are not a part of the problem, and completely acknowledging there are parents who are alcoholics, there are parents who abuse their children. But if we work with them with the belief that I know, despite all of this, you have the child's best interest in your heart. And how do we make a partnership? Because the more we don't trust them, the lesser they are also going to trust us. I think building that trust and giving them the knowledge and skills, I think has been useful.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we've come to the end of the webinar. Yeah, so really, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been really good talking to you for me personally. It's been 3 years since I last met you. So thank you so much for joining us. And it's been really inspiring, you know, listening to the stories of change in Kanavu, in Kadalur. And I think this is also the crux of the problem that we are trying to deal through the Bhumi Fellowship, working with different stakeholders, investing them. So so to people who've joined us today, uh, please go look at the website again. The third deadline to apply to the fellowship is May 15th. So visit fellowship.bhumi.ngo. We look forward to hearing from more of you, and hoping that many of you join us in our journey.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
once again.
Thank you. And I would like to just wish all of you all good luck. And I hope to see you on this side of the journey as well. You can please connect to us through our Facebook website, all of our different handles as well. I would also, I think it's not very clear, I would also send it as a message. So please connect to us on social media, reach out to us on our website, and we'll be very happy to take any further questions as well. We are also running a fundraiser to support communities in rural Kadalur. And if you are interested, again, please write to us and we can share the link with you. And together we can support our communities. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.